It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 719 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. That is episode 719 for those of you keeping track. Hey, I have another great episode lined up for you today. Joining me as my guest is Jamie Shanks. Jamie is a repeat visitor to Accelerate, and as well, he is the CEO at Sales for Life and author of a book titled Spear Selling, Spear all in uppercase letters, the ultimate account-based sales guide for the modern digital sales professional. So Jamie joins me on this episode of Accelerate to talk about the factors that really drive sales growth. And we're going to touch on a number of topics. One that's really interesting is, we talk about sales enablement and why Jamie believes sales enablement really needs to modernize its approach to supporting sellers. And we have an interesting talk also about the fundamentals of sales, what some people call the soft skills. And we'll talk about really how essential they are. But more important, we're going to dig into why it's hard to get sales leaders to buy in to actually investing and training their sellers on these soft skills, quote unquote soft skills, which I actually believe, as many of you know that listen to the show, these soft skills are actually the hardest skills to master. So we're going to get into all that and much, much more. Now, before we get to Jamie, I want to take a quick second to talk about my Sales Growth Planner. Now, this is the ultimate planner and tracker for high-performance sellers and sales leaders. And now, the Sales Growth Planner was designed to help you identify your big, bold sales goals and give you a step-by-step framework to enable the learning and the personal growth you need in order to achieve them. So, as all designed by me, the Sales Growth Planner is designed to help you act on your highest priorities, ensure that you hold yourself accountable. It's all based on a planning format that I've successfully used for over 4 decades as a top producer and high-growth sales leader. The thought and effort you put into creating your plan will be repaid with interest at the end of 12 months. So become the best version of you. Visit thesaleshouse.com/planner to get your sales growth planner today. That is thesaleshouse.com/planner. Okay, let's jump into it with my guest, Jamie Shanks. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to talk to you again. It's been a while.
It has.
So speaking of a while, so when I was doing my preparation for our talk today, and one thing I do, I go to people's sites and look at their updated blog posts and so on. But the first thing that popped up was I had the saved post from your site from 2015.
Wow.
And it was infographic that somebody that, I don't know, third-party contributor, Dennis Yu, I don't know if he works for you or did work for you or whatever, put together about the sort of now infamous or legendary Forrester report that talked about all the doom and gloom for B2B sellers. And I thought it'd be sort of interesting, here we are, 4 years on from that and approaching within a year of what they consider was going to be sort of D-Day for B2B sales and sort of go through that and see what your take is on that. So one of the big takeaways from that report, Forrester claimed that back in 2015 that by 2020, 20% of B2B sellers will have lost their jobs. But arguably, you could make the case that actually B2B sales employment has actually increased during that time.
Well, it turns out that I'm going to lose my employment as a prognosticator. But I think at the time, everybody saw the movement between field sales to inside sales. And there was a movement at that time. The word social selling, the concept that we helped pioneer, was only founded in 2011, 2012. So it was in its early days. But AAISP, American Association of Inside Sales Professionals, at that time was also using some of Nigel's, trying to recall Nigel's last name, who kind of came up with Sales 2.0. And it was this emergence of everybody moving from field to inside, and that not everybody was willing to make that cut. And the reality is there was more productivity and yield and throughput per seller that could be had from inside sales. I actually think that overall, where I failed in that model is that most sales leaders, when they acquire budget, when they think about growth, compounded annual growth rates, what they really end up focusing on is the first playbook that they're very accustomed to, which is about increasing the average number of, or the number of sellers on their team. It's the most common, operational expense that a VP of sales knows how to do. Now I'll make another bold prediction that in the next 5 years, there will be a scaling back. I can't tell you how much that will be, but there will be a scaling back in that massive growth of just hiring, because,
Well, for SDR type people, inside sales, or account execs, or both?
Well, I think that the first natural place that the CFO is going to look at is the largest line item, which will be field sales. And they'll start thinking about the rate of return I need to get from $100,000 or $150,000 seller is X times Y equals Z. And I think that there will be less investment in just throwing bodies in every geographic territory and every vertical. And there'll be more scrutiny in thinking about how do we just create more efficiency from what we have? How do we create more yield throughput? That's my bold prediction. Mm-hmm. But I think where we got it wrong was there's not going to be the demise of sellers, because what's happened over the last 5 years is that the same playbook is being run. They're just throwing bodies at the problem. But we're starting to see
technologies.
Technology changed dramatically in that time horizon. It's actually been incredible to see sales performance technology expand. Yeah.
Right. But by the same token, over that period of time, we haven't seen sales performance expand.
No, and if you look at Miller Heiman's CSO Insights data, which show that we're having a decrease in the percentage of sellers that are hitting quota attainment.
Yeah, well, and even if you look at win rates within various industries, certainly the win rates are, especially in the companies that are tending to use the technologies most aggressively, the win rates are fairly low. And so what do you think that portends? Because that to me speaks to the fact that what's happening is just not sustainable. I mean, if you make these huge investments in technology, which primarily, granted, are geared toward top-of-funnel activities, at some point you have to see an improvement, see that flow through down to the bottom of the funnel, and we seem to have a disconnect right there on that.
It's a carpet bombing, essentially. So it's air cover, trying to get as many meetings as possible, trying to hit as many territories as possible. I think let's actually look at it at a macroeconomic scale. The economy has been doing great over the last 10 years. Your American economy, I'm in Canada here. And so
we'll say North America.
North American economy has been doing very well. So companies are investing with a growth mindset, investing with a top-line revenue mindset. If, as many predict, the economy slows, I think that we'll have more of a bottom line approach, more of a profit first approach. And that's when companies will start thinking about, I need greater return from what I have rather than just massive investments, which is creeping up the cost per seller enormously. Or let's hire sellers in every geographic market we can. Well, not every market is as profitable as it could be. Let's think about yield and throughput from what we have. That's what I think is going to happen.
Well, I tend to agree. I think that there's a lot to that. And the question then is, though, what does that change look like? So let's take, we've had this incredible growth in inside sales, and certainly, as a top-of-funnel infrastructure, SDRs, BDRs, and so on, lead investments in lead gen and all of our sales engagement technologies and meeting intelligence, all these other new categories that have popped up. In your mind, where do you think that's going to go? I mean, are we going to see a reversion to some degree, saying, look, maybe we've gone pendulum swung too far relative to technologies. We got to go back, be a little more face to face, or what do you think is going to happen?
I'll tell you a story. So
I like stories.
When you're part of an entrepreneur association group, it's called Gestalt. So a Gestalt means don't give advice, tell stories that allow people to identify with that story and make their own decisions. So I'm going to use Gestalt here for a second. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we win a Fortune 50 company to scale digital selling or social selling training amongst their thousands of sellers. It was the first time, and I told this on a webinar a couple of weeks ago, it was the very first time I encountered artificial intelligence at a real world applicable scalable motion. Here's what was happening. What we teach, imagine if you were dealing with a seller dealing with inbound leads, being able to parse their total addressable market, all of their leads, based on relationships, and then using kind of like a Pareto's law, focus on the accounts that have the strongest social relationships against existing customers.
Using LinkedIn as the basis of the tool.
Using LinkedIn as the basis.
Right.
Well, this company was also pairing that data with all kinds of demographic, firmographic, usage data from the customer. And it was feeding an algorithm to the seller that says, this customer is what we call a hand raiser. This is somebody who is demonstrating the right activities that show buying intent. They combined those data sets and they fed it to the sellers. Here's what was the result. The result is they pared down the lead flow per rep by 80%. They actually would only deliver 20% of the previous volume of leads. Yet, conversion and results doubled in 90 days. What they realized is that the carpet bombing mentality is, hey, give me 1,000 leads, I'll call them all, give them all equal love, something good will come out of it. What if we only spoke to a fraction of those and dealt with a fraction of those? So the answer is I don't know necessarily where it might be going, other than the fact that this is the beginnings. This is like we're in the caveman days of being able to identify smarter, better, faster ways that one individual can create greater return on investment. Thus, the thesis is that over time, I might not need as many human bodies to accomplish the same or greater results. So that's where I still believe that CFO mindseted chief revenue officers might start looking at achieving more with less.
Sure. So let's take your story, for example, because I like that story. So one of the obvious changes is they said, look, instead of insisting that we have 5x pipeline coverage, we're going to be at 2x pipeline coverage. And, close rates, win rates tend to be the reciprocal of the pipeline coverage ratio. So they were closing 50% of their deals because the reps themselves had more time to actually work the deals in a quality method, in a quality manner, as opposed to what they were doing before. And then now they said, okay, we're sort of at that level. Then how do we scale from there? And this is, I think, this is a tricky part for many sales leaders today, because they understand this whole idea of, it's not all of them, a few now, but I think the realizations are beginning to dawn that they've gone over the top relative to pipeline coverages and other things, and just the burden that puts on a seller, right? Because look, if you got a 5x pipeline coverage, you got to close 5 big deals a month. You can't work 25 big opportunities.
I'm going to do what you measure me towards. So if you measure me to 5x pipeline coverage, somehow Salesforce is going to show 5x pipeline coverage.
That's right. So I had spoken at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I put the challenge to the sales leaders there. I said, so you really want to do the opposite. Start with what your desired win rate is, and then say, okay, how can we scale that? So you just sort of described a story of a company who's somewhat doing that. So how is that client looking at how we're winning 50% of our deals now, or 50% of our qualified opportunities. How do we scale that?
Don't know the second part of that equation yet. Yeah. So all that I know thus far is what they've done is made it more efficient per rep. The input, so they doubled conversion, and then on the back end they were winning more deals. It all flowed into winning more deals. But we haven't got to the scale motion. How do we get 10% compounded growth, 20% compounded, 50, and so forth? That part of the story I don't know yet. I only know that they've solved for X. And it's an inevitability that they eventually figure out why, but most companies haven't solved for X yet.
Well, but if you do solve for X, it actually, to my mind, it actually becomes almost a little bit easier to scale, because what you're saying is, look, we've proven predictably, not that we close 1 out of 5, that we can close 1 out of 2. Now, what are the attributes that enable us to do that? It could be the person, could be the product market fit. I mean, you have
content, and
you have data that tells you. That's the thing in all these scenarios. And this is the part that I think makes sales leaders so hesitant about it, is they've been drilled into them that somehow we got to go prospect the crap out of things. So we have this huge pipeline coverage, and it's like a security blanket. And it's a security blanket all the way up the line, starting from the seller to the frontline manager to the sales leader to the VP to the CEO. They can point to somebody and say, well, we've got so much interest in our product. And yet no one seems to come to them and say, well, yeah, but you've got a crappy win rate. What are you doing about that?
Where I think, and where I'm seeing also white space, I can tell you where we want to move our business and where I would say the weakest part of sales performance or sales enablement is actually at the frontline sales manager and the front and second line sales managers. So, we would say kind of the manager director level, and then at the RVP or GM level, they're running a playbook that had been run from 20 years ago. They are pulling the same plays that they've been executing forever. And there is a lack of acumen, lack of knowledge transfer, lack of courseware that has ever been developed, or at least getting in their hands, to teach them to be better leaders, better coaches, to look at things differently. I would say in our world, in this sales training world, it is the lightest of all of the delivery mechanisms that are going out in the market. So that in lies that opportunity that I think that the average chief revenue officer has not taken the time to think of the business as if they were a CFO and look at it from a profit-first mentality and attack a problem as if a CFO would attack it. They've attacked it from the same mindset that we as sellers did. Call, book as many meetings as we can, throw as much over the fence as we can, win deals, live a quarter mile at a time or 90 days at a time, and just be happy with the results. I don't think it's like working in, not on the business.
Yeah, well, certainly no argument with any of that. I mean, I think that, and you make a point in something you've written recently about managers have to become investors or have the investor mindset. And I certainly think that's true in terms of investing, in the capacity. And there's so little investment in the capacity other than just raw hiring of people. But it's to your point, very little development of the capabilities of the individuals with them. And I'll ask you the question, sort of what you see from your experience and the work you're doing, how we break out of the cycle is, we're seeing average duration of tenure of salespeople and sales managers, VPs of sales, falling fairly rapidly. I mean, you hear anecdotal data.
Months or something, 17 months, average. I've heard that of the VP of sales.
VP of sales, and they have an SDRs, I think, are between 12 and 14 months. And I mean, how does anybody function in that type of environment when there's such rapid turn? But then you look at the incentives, as we talked about before, and the incentives are out of whack. So you have out of whack incentives you're trying to drive people to. The incentives don't create more productivity per individual, and we seem to be stuck in this loop because I think everybody thinks that the problem is this person just doesn't know how to utilize the tools and technologies that exist to make things more effective, and yet that's not the solution.
And actually, so what you're saying is perhaps, and I'm a Canadian, so I may have to use a hockey analogy, and I'm filled with analogy.
I'm a hockey fan.
Yeah, they are not getting enough time on skates. They're not practicing enough because, look, I've been a CEO of Sales for Life for 7 years, and I feel like I'm in second gear of learning. There is infinitely more I don't know than I know, kind of thing.
Oh yeah,
and that's 7 years in one role. So I can see your point that if there's this much transition and there's this much 90-day focus working in a business, not on a business. I can see that it doesn't afford the luxury of learning and development, future thinking, looking at things at 30,000 feet. It just doesn't allow any time for that.
Yeah, I believe we are in this inflection period where, yes, we've had, I call it the golden age of sales in some respects, because we have what are, and oftentimes, these pretty incredible tools that sellers can use now. But we haven't really figured out how to use them. And that's, I think once we begin to figure that out, and once we get more tools, actually, the answer, I won't say technology is always the answer, but right now the tools are so focused on top of funnel. It's like, well, that's great, but selling really takes place in the middle of the funnel, right? I mean, prospecting is one thing, but maybe a distinct minority who thinks that's still primarily marketing activity, even though I spent years cold calling myself and so on and building my career that way. Yeah, I've always sort of felt that was the case. So, what I consider these core selling actions happen in the middle of the funnel that really dictate whether you win or lose the deal. I haven't begun to apply the tools and technologies there in a way to help sellers help their buyers make decisions.
Well, actually, I have a question for you then, because this is something that I've been thinking about lately. Now, we're in this sales performance, sales training universe, right?
Right.
And I believe there's more curriculum, IP, methodology in that very framework, that stage that you talk about, the middle of the funnel, than any other part of the kind of buyer journey or seller life cycle. Why is it then that there might be some disparity of what people are working on or sk set? Why, if there's that much horsepower in the world to solve the middle of the funnel, why are we struggling with that? Number two, why is our own industry so massively fragmented with a million ideas in that middle of the funnel? And there's no transformer juggernaut of our own industry. It's the most fragmented cottage industry in the world. So why hasn't somebody come along and said, this is the universal truth in that middle of the funnel?
Well, how much time do we have? That's my show, I can tell you. Well, there are no universal truths. That's one, right? So I believe there are things that are close to being universal truths, but they're applied individually and uniquely in every situation. And I think that that's one of the problems that we're having, is that, yes, there are a ton of methodologies out there. I might disagree slightly in terms of where the horsepower is really being focused on these days, because I think it's being disproportionately focused on the top of the funnel, just because... It's funny, because
I think it's the middle of the
just because the tools are more there.
Yeah.
But, I think the closest we have to universal truth is our social psychology, the work that's been done there about how you connect with another person, how you engage their interest, how you start building trust. These fundamental building blocks, I think not enough attention is paid to them. What we say is, look, here's a process to use. Go out and use this process. But it assumes that everybody, in fact, has built this core foundation of human skills that enabled them to make those processes and those methods work. And in my opinion, we don't. And so what we're doing as an industry is we're assuming people are human beings, good human beings, or functional human beings, when in fact, in a selling situation, I would say 90% of them aren't. And so...
They're being robotic. They're being process-driven rather than
right.
authentic-driven.
Yeah. Right. And, the biggest example of that is, the industry, and I mean, I'm guilty of this as well. I mean, I've certainly talked about this in the past, is, the industry is guilty of this idea, sales industry, of saying, look, the process a buyer goes through is this linear process, right? Stage-driven, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I have to admit, I was fortunate enough to learn fairly early in my career that come to the realization, no, that's not the case, right? This is not the way it works. It didn't track with what I was experiencing with the buyers. And I always thought, okay, I'm sort of a lonely voice out here talking about this. But then, fortunately, a year ago, Gartner comes out with their research on buyer enablement. And the buyer journey that they describe, and they put in their diagram, they call Brent Adamson, who helped lead that, calls it their spaghetti diagram, because the lines go all over, right?
Yeah.
And yet, since they have brought that out, I've not seen one major sales training company say, we're doing a major rethink of how we look at this based on this data that came out. Not one.
Well, because if think of the middle of the funnel, that means that a Miller-Hyman blue sheet or an Altify system, which is about step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
is useless.
To
Altify's point specifically, I remember reading an article by one of their executives, who was saying, without a strong sales process, the seller won't know when to close. And I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? If a salesperson needs a process to tell them, now ask a question. It's like, what are they doing in sales? And what a poor job you've done of helping this person develop a sales sense and the human selling skills they need to engage with somebody and understand now's the time when we reach agreement on this. So that's just an example where I think that, we've got a majority of sort of the sales training space marching down the path they've always marched. And there's this huge disconnect with buyers. And what they do is they give lip service to the idea that, now we've got 6.8 stakeholders in a decision, but haven't fundamentally changed how they go about it.
Now, question, deeper, harder question. Now,
welcome to the Jamie Shanks show. Yeah, that's okay.
Well, those human soft skills, of course, I believe can be taught. But now just think about this from a business standpoint. Can they be sold to a customer as easily? And this might be the challenge in itself. Like, think about owning a business around this, because how do you demonstrate? Because that's the ultimate vaporware, right? Like, how do you demonstrate you have learning skills and capabilities around the most human, soft skill, intangible thing you can't touch? Because at least process and things that we do are very tactile, right? I'll admit
that's why you gravitate to them.
And so I wonder. I'm just pondering this idea to you that those soft skills would be so hard to demonstrate. They'd actually be very hard to sell conceptually into a business. And maybe that is why the industry has spent less time dealing on things that they know could be valuable, but hard to demonstrate.
Well, and that's why you're going to tell all your friends about my venture, the Sales House, because that's exactly what we're doing. I
love my new podcast. This is great.
We launched that late last year in the tail end of the third quarter last year. And it's geared specifically to this, is how do you help B2B sellers develop their own capabilities by initially focusing on the human soft skills. And
That's fantastic.
And because, look at my own career. Those were the keys to my success. I mean, I worked in highly complex technical fields all my career till I started my own company, and even subsequent to that. And a history major, working in very technical fields. I never had any training on how to sell major accounts, and I went from selling to small businesses, migrating over a period of years to selling to the world's largest enterprises.
You're able to pull EQ, so teaching EQ, essentially.
Well, I think there's more to it than what people think as emotional intelligence, but yes. But that is part of it. And I have a different way I structure and look at it than the EQ people do, but it's certainly, there's overlay. But a critical part, and one of the critical soft skills, is learning. And so with the Sales House, as loyal listeners to the show know, since I post an ad about it every week on the show, is that it is about learning, right? Is you have to commit to spending 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, some period of time every day to expand your horizons in some dimension about the work that you're doing.
Nothing helped me more in my career. I was a late bloomer to adult learning. So I finished my master's degree at 25, and I thought, no, I'm done.
I knew it all. Yeah.
I jumped into sales, learned the hard way, and it wasn't until I was about 30. I'm 40 now. It wasn't until about 30 I started, accumulating knowledge, books, podcasts, ebooks. Now I listen to a book a week. I try to consume 52 books a week, 52 books a year.
Right. Yeah. And I estimated in 2018, I read 150.
That's books. Fantastic.
Well, in part driven by my podcast, because I read my guest books, but not entirely. And I don't read only about sales. And I think that's the other part that is such an important thing that we're not spending enough time with our people coming into sales these days and the newer generation of sellers, is this idea. You talk about acumen, and the acumen comes in many forms. You can say, well, there's relationship acumen, there's communications acumen, there's business acumen, there's customer acumen, and there's just knowledge about the world around them, right? I can't say how many times that been in a difficult situation. I've sold every continent but Antarctica. I was selling to the Soviet Union back before the wall came down. You had people in China, India, different cultures. But just the fact that I bothered to read something about those cultures, about those people, there was some basis for connection. So I don't want people to think that it's just learning about sales, because quite frankly, that's kind of boring after a while.
I would say it's only about 25 to 33% of my content consumption. The rest of it, as you can tell, what I'm trying to learn is to become a better CEO and business leader. And what it's teaching me, as you can tell through the conversation we had today, I'm learning how financial acumen applies to running a business unit, which a sales leader becomes. And a sales leader isn't just about thinking about quota attainment, 3x pipeline, number of meetings booked, number of flights and site visits you had with a customer. That's working in a business. Working on a business has you thinking like a P&L. And that's where I'm trying to also, even though I'm really concentrating on social and digital selling, to justify those expenses, I'm trying to help VPs of sales rethink where they acquire things like budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I know we've run out of time, and you've been writing about this topic, was helping your CFOs acquire budget for sales initiatives. So urge people to go to the Sales for Life blog to read that. So, Jamie, tell people how they can learn more about you and connect with you.
Fantastic. You can connect with me on LinkedIn anytime. Our website is salesforlife.com. I just finished a book called Spear Selling, which the intent is it's the ultimate guide to modern digital selling through account-based selling. And it's not enough companies were focusing their social selling efforts on specific account-based sales. And so this book is very tactile, very play-by-play to help you. But our job is pipeline. We were talking about top of the funnel, middle of the funnel. We are dead set experts on pipeline creation. Your world, middle of the funnel, isn't our expertise. Yeah.
All right. Well, we should join up then.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, Jamie, fantastic to talk to you again. And we'll have to have you back, because I prepared a whole set of questions on account-based selling, and we didn't even get to those. So,
that shows that we're able to go off on a tangent, because I'm sure you've had podcasts where it needed to be process-driven.
Well, not too many, but there have been a couple. So, all right. Well, I appreciate it. It's been great talking to you, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. You take care.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for the week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for joining me. I also want to thank my guest, Jamie Shanks. Joining me again next week will be my guest, Wayne Cerullo. Wayne and I are going to be talking about the danger that sellers face by putting too much focus on data and diverting their attention and focus away from their prospects that they're trying to help. So instead of trusting their experience, we're seeing sellers depend more and more on the numbers. And we're going to discuss the limitations of quantitative data in sales and try to answer the question, what is the real meaning of the data for sellers? So be sure to join us then. Now, before you go, I have a favor to ask. If you enjoy this podcast, if you listen to it regularly, then everyone here who works on the show would really appreciate it if you could take just a moment and rate and review Accelerate on iTunes. So thank you again for joining me. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.